Alright, so we're getting close to the end, moving down to the pelvic girdle. So pectoral girdle was shoulder area. Pelvic girdle is going to be hip area. Put a bit in the way. So pelvic girdle consists of your two hip bones, coxal, they're also called innominate bones. Coxal is probably more common than that. It's going to support the trunk, so your hips. We talked a little bit about how, when you're active and things like that, your legs get sore. Older people have hip problems because it supports so much of your weight. So it supports the trunk, provides attachment for your lower limbs, and helps to protect part of your abdomen and reproductive organs. So the pelvis is going to include the sacrum and coccyx, which is also attached to your vertebral column, and the pelvic girdle area altogether. So there will be pelvis, which is those three things. Pelvic girdle, which is your pelvic bones. And then there is that's more of your pelvic girdle will be broke up into different parts. So here I can see a diagram. Here would be an X-ray. So sacrum and coccyx are at the back. We've talked about those before. Here's your two main hip bones that we will break into parts that we'll talk about. Pubic symphysis is basically an immovable joint that is attaching your two pubic bones. Very important for women. Why would that be?
Pregnancy.
Pregnancy and childbirth. It gives a little more wiggle room when the child is being born. So there is this pubic symphysis that helps a little bit with childbirth. Obturator foramen is the large opening on the bottom of your hip bones. And then the femur is going to be part of the leg, but obturator foramen is going to be one on each side on the bottom of your hip bones. So each hip bone has three parts that we'll talk about. The ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. And there's kind of certain ways to remind you of where they are. They're fused in the region of the acetabulum, which is the cup-like depression where your hip bone is going to actually fit to the inside. The ilium is the top part. So the ilium is the largest. It's the uppermost. It's going to have the iliac crest, sacroiliac joint, anterior superior spine. The italicized words, not so much, but you do need to know specifically the ilium is the top part. So when you feel your hip bones, that is actually part of your ilium that you're actually feeling. So the ilium is the top part of your hips. It's more than just the top, but we'll talk about that. Ischium, ischium is more kind of in what I would say your butt region, so ishi, ooey. Ischium forms the L-shaped portion that you basically sit on. I do expect you to know the ischial tuberosity. So when somebody sits on your lap and you say, oh, you have a bony butt, that bone that's digging into you is actually the ischial tuberosity that is the main point that you sit on. And then the pubis kind of makes sense with the pubic area. Pubis is the front portion of the hip bones, joins at that pubic symphysis. Pubic arch, obturator foramen is those large openings. That's the largest foramen in your body. And then the pubic brim that sits at the top. So, my expectations, I'll move him over a little bit. My expectations expectations, the ilium, like they said, the largest part. The acetabulum is this notch. So if I look at my skeleton, in your arm area, we talked about the glenoid cavity that your humerus fit into. So now down in your hip area, the head of your femur is going to sit into this cup-like depression, and that cup-like depression is called the acetabulum. So that's where the head of the femur is going to fit. And that is the area where all three parts of your hip bones come together. So ilium is the top, ischium is the back, so here we're looking at the back side, and pubis is going to be the front. I expect you to know those three parts. And I also expect you to know that the bottom part of the ischium is the ischial tuberosity. So if I look at my skeleton, the ilium is going to be the top, pubis is going to be the front, ischium is down here on the back, and this tuberosity is basically right here, and that's what you feel when someone sits on your lap. That ischial tuberosity is the bony part of your butt that you feel. So those are my expectations for what I feel you should know. Acetabulum, obturator foramen, pubis front, ischium back, ilium top. Male and female skeletons. I have a little activity that I will send out to everybody. So if you have a skeleton in your room, you can do an activity to decide if you think it's male or female. Female skull is smaller and lighter, typically, lower bone density. Female chin is a little bit more pointed, where a male's is a little bit more square. Pelvic girdle, female hip bones are going to be spread out a little bit further, and there again, that's for childbirth. The pubic arch is also wider in a female, and that pubic arch is right here. It's kind of underneath. Because when a child is born, this opening right here is where the baby comes through. So as it's sitting in the uterus, this is where the baby comes through, and sometimes also the tailbone on a male will be more curved, where a female will be more flat, because many times even if a woman's tailbone is too curved, the baby can't come through, and then it'll end up being a C-section, because once it gets to that bone, it can't go any further. That might be reason for a C-section.
How do they know that the bone is too curved?
Usually they don't find that out until during childbirth. So that would be an example of where a woman is in labor and is pushing and the baby just won't come out.
I would probably end up pushing the doctor.
Yeah. So that is sometimes one of the cases, and that's kind of what I talked about right here. And I have a little activity that I'll send out that actually has diagrams that go with it too. So here you can see pubic arch on a female is a little bit wider. The hip bones are flared out a little bit more. The pelvic brim, like I said, is this opening where the baby will have to pass through. Notice it's usually a little bit more wider also in a female. So when you talk about female hips or wider hips, there is actually a purpose for that. It's not just something that we have for no reason.